Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Kotin. I am the president of the Chicago Bar Association this year. And welcome, and thank you for being part of our first Curbing Violence in Chicago Summit. I chose my words carefully when I said thank you for being part of our summit, because you're not simply attending an event. I hope you realize that you're all important parts of this event. Many of you are invited guests of ours because of your unique and important positions in our community. We want to interact with you, we want to work with you, and we want to hopefully get your commitment to participate in at least 2 more summits that we already have planned for later this year. As we all know, gun violence is a problem that's been affecting the entire country for many years. But we also know that Chicago has seen an unprecedented spike in gun violence in 2016 and continuing. President Trump has talked and tweeted so much about the gun violence problem in Chicago that it feels like we've become the poster child for all that's wrong with urban society. And many groups have had seminars and symposiums and town hall meetings and talked about this problem over the past year. And I've watched many of those and read many of those, and frankly, I've been largely underwhelmed by the groups that are nothing more than people getting together to point fingers and complain about a problem, because that doesn't get us anywhere. And it's against that backdrop that I received a phone call in February from a fellow trial lawyer and a friend of mine, Tony Romanucci. And in that phone call, there was a trial lawyers event that evening. And Tony asked me if I was attending the event. I told him I was, and he was glad to hear that. And he said, I want to hand you something. I'd like you to read it. So I showed up at the event, and Tony handed me this unmarked manila envelope and said, take a look at this when you have a minute and give me a call. So I put the envelope in my pocket, and I looked around for cameras, and I thought, what the heck did I just get myself into? And it turned out that what Tony was doing was putting together a program involving police and civilians, which was designed to improve the police-civilian encounters in Chicago, which so often go wrong and result in tragic outcomes. And Tony wanted the Chicago Bar Association to co-sponsor his event. And so I then discussed it with our executive director, Terry Murphy, and we agreed that the police-civilian encounter problem was one prong of this epidemic, but there were really many other prongs that also needed to be discussed. And then we looked at the various groups who had already spoken out on this topic, and we realized that we, a large group, 20,000 lawyers and judges, may have a unique perspective on this, and we also have an ability to potentially address the problem and not just identify the problem. This is particularly true when we realize that we have access to virtually every stakeholder in this issue. And so, with that, less than 3 months ago, this concept of a Curbing Violence in Chicago Summit was born. And here we are today. So here's what I want to do. I want to start with one piece of encouraging news, and then I'm going to tell you something that we simply cannot do. I'm going to tell you something we refuse to do, and then I'm going to tell you what we hope to accomplish today, all right? So let me start with the encouraging news. Every single stakeholder in this gun violence epidemic wants to do whatever it takes to solve the problem. Nobody benefits from gun violence. Everyone wants it to stop. And so with that as the common goal, the question is clear. What can we do together to reach an answer? That's good news. Here's what we're not going to do today. We will not waste your day by pointing fingers and complaining about this problem. That gets us nowhere. All we're going to do is talk about solutions, identifying the problem and talking about solutions. Here's what we can't do today. There is no way that over several hours on a Friday, we are going to solve the gun violence problem in Chicago. It's too big, it's too complex. But if we do this the right way, this is what I hope to accomplish. If we focus on the factors that are causing the problem, and we reach some agreement on changes that can be made to address the problem, then perhaps we can set forth an agenda for our next summit in September and come together and put together tangible action which will achieve some results. So as a starting point, let me share with you some numbers, some data, some facts. And much of this data comes from the amazing work done by the University of Chicago Crime Lab. Their executive director, Rosanna Ander, is with us today, and she'll be on our fourth panel this afternoon. But the Crime Lab published a report in January about the 2016 gun violence problem in Chicago. And I'm going to share some data, hopefully without editorializing, and I think that will lead us into our four panels and our keynote address today, okay? 764 people were murdered in Chicago in 2016. That's a 58% increase from 2015. Non-fatal shootings were up by 43%. And that spike threatens a 20-year trend of decreasing crime in Chicago. 76% of homicide suspects are under the age of 30. 88% of them have at least one prior arrest. 44% of them have been arrested more than 10 times, and they're under 30 years old. African Americans comprise 1/3 of our city's population, but nearly 80% of homicide victims were African American. And by contrast, whites also comprise 1/3 of our city's population, but only 5% of homicide victims were white. I thought this was interesting. 77% of homicides in 2016 occurred in public streets or alleys, literally street crimes. There was a 25% increase in homicide suspects who were not affiliated with gangs. And on the other hand, there was a 6% decrease in homicide suspects that did have gang affiliation. And now here are some really startling numbers. Chicago is broken down into 77 named neighborhoods. Of those 77 neighborhoods, 5 of them accounted for 32% of the homicides in 2016. If you take the 8 most violent neighborhoods in Chicago, 8 out of 77, there were 340 homicides, and those were more homicides than in all of New York City last year. Just 8 neighborhoods here. And now how about this for a tale of two cities? 77 neighborhoods. If you take the 11 most violent neighborhoods, 423 homicides. That's right here. But on the other hand, the 11 least violent Chicago neighborhoods, 0 homicides. 2 completely different cities, but we're all Chicago. In 1988, Chicago had a lower homicide rate than both New York City and Los Angeles. Last year, Chicago's homicide rate was more than double New York and LA combined. And now here is a statistic that some people think explains part of the problem. In November 2015, there were 60,000 street stops by Chicago police. 60,000, 60. 2 months later, January of 2016, that number had dropped by 80% to less than 10,000. Now, that sudden and dramatic decline in street stops coincides time-wise with the release of the Laquan McDonald video, with the announcement of the Department of Justice investigation into the Chicago police, and with the implementation of the ACLU settlement with the Chicago police. But before we jump to any easy conclusion that the decrease in street stops equals the increase in homicides, consider this. Between 2011 and 2015, New York City saw a decrease in street stops of 97%. They went down by 97%. We went down by 80%. Yet in those same years in New York, with the decrease in street stops, they also saw a continuing decrease in homicides. So that doesn't explain it. These are just some of the numbers that I want you to keep in mind for background. What are the causes of the spike in gun violence here? Nobody knows for sure, and that's one of the reasons that we're here today. And so what I want to do is I want to ask you 4 questions, and these questions are really going to form the basis of our panel discussions today. Number 1, is it the fractured relationship between law enforcement and citizens in the community? Is it the loss of that unspoken respect that used to persist? Tony Romanucci will be moderating our first panel of key stakeholders on that topic, and they'll discuss that. Number 2, is it the plethora of other problems that are affecting our neighborhoods? Broken homes, poverty, demolition of public housing, drug addiction, closing of mental health centers, etc. Judge Mulroy has a remarkable panel of people that live and work with these issues every day, and they'll discuss that. Number 3, when Superintendent Eddie Johnson came to speak to the CBA a couple of months ago, he told us that back when he started on the police force, gang conflict used to be based upon drugs and turf neighborhoods. But we now have social media. We have Twitter and Instagram and Facebook Live, and tensions and disputes can spread across the city with the touch of one button. So is social media to blame? Is it part of the problem? Lori Lightfoot will moderate a panel of remarkably accomplished, involved folks to discuss the impact of social media and what we can do about it. And then 4th, are we just suffering the consequences of being such a large and diverse city with so many different races and ethnicities and religions all trying to live in the same space? Well, New York and Los Angeles are bigger and just as diverse as we are. Both cities face terrible gun violence problems of their own, but both of those cities have addressed the problem, and right now their combined homicide rate is less than half of ours. So what can we learn from these cities or from others? I'll moderate our final panel this afternoon to talk about those issues. At lunchtime, we're thrilled to have Dr. Ronal Serpas from Loyola University in New Orleans here to share his insight as our keynote speaker. Dr. Serpas served for 34 years in law enforcement. He has led many large city police departments, and I'll tell you more about him when we meet him at lunchtime. Everybody has question cards on your tables. So as the panels are going, feel free to write down questions, and I think we'll have somebody going around to pick up your questions. We moderators are going to leave time at the end of our panels to try to answer your questions, and I don't think we're going to get to all of them, but we'll do the best we can, and maybe that's a good thing we have 2 more summits planned. But first, I want to introduce somebody who for most of you needs little introduction. Justice Ann Burke of the Illinois Supreme Court is personally very concerned about the gun violence problem in Chicago, and she is committed to finding the causes of the problem and supporting whatever changes need to be made to reach a solution. Since the day I became president of the CBA last summer, Justice Burke has worked tirelessly in her dedication to our criminal justice system. I've watched it. In promoting anything that needs to be done to ensure that the system operates efficiently and, more important, fairly to everybody involved. Ann Burke is a graduate of DePaul University and then IIT Kent College of Law. She was appointed as a judge to the Illinois Court of Claims in 1991, to the Illinois Appellate Court, 1st District in 1995, and then she was elected to the Illinois Supreme Court in 1996. Justice Burke is married to Alderman Ed Burke, who, like his wife, has been wonderfully committed to doing whatever is needed to combat gun violence in Chicago. Chairman Burke, a couple of months ago, introduced a resolution in City Council suggesting that all city stakeholders be present and participate in this summit to solve this problem. Now, Justice Burke is the commencement speaker at a college graduation this afternoon, but she very generously rearranged her schedule today so that she could be with us here this morning and offer some thoughts. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Illinois Supreme Court Justice Ann Burke.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. And thank you, Dan, very much for that very kind introduction. And on behalf of my colleagues on the Illinois Supreme Court, we applaud all of you here today. Now, on numerous occasions, CBA President Dan Kotin and Executive Director Terry Murphy have spoken to me or with me regarding the criminal justice reform and the violence that plagues our city. So I invited them to join me at the George Layton Criminal Courts Building at 26th and California here in Chicago to view the pretrial services, bond court process, and also to take a complete tour through the building, and also to speak with the stakeholders. Now, that was last November. We spent an entire day touring the facility. It was their observations, I think, during that visit that confirmed Dan and Terry and motivated them to continue to develop this summit in the hope of taking criminal justice reform to the next level. And because of the leadership of Dan Kotin and Terry Romanucci, who co-chaired the planning committee to ensure that this summit surely became a reality, we need to thank. So my thanks to both of them and to the entire planning committee for securing a very impressive array of national, state, and local executive experts to participate in today's summit on curbing the violence in Chicago. The summit is a testament to the Chicago Bar Association's leadership and underscores the CBA's ongoing commitment to our community in its efforts to reduce and, as well as we all hope and pray, to ultimately eliminate violence that is afflicting our great city. And leadership is all about getting people involved in taking action. So I applaud the CBA for bringing together the elected officials, law enforcement, community and business leaders, interfaith leaders, academia, our state and federal judiciary, Chicago's legal professionals, and numerous community organizations for this conference. All of you gathered here today care about our city and its residents. And many of you, I know, have been working tirelessly to stem the violence that has brought much pain, suffering, and loss to so many people and families. But I'm confident that by joining our minds and our hearts to focus on the problems at hand, together we can make progress in reducing the violence in Chicago, especially for our youth. Now, the root causes of the violence that is occurring are truly complex, as you all know, and involve a myriad of socioeconomic issues. Those, as you know, include profound poverty, lack of access to basic medical care, insufficient number of mental health and substance abuse treatment programs, educational inequality, single-parent families, which often means lack of appropriate role models and mentors for them, an insufficient number of job skills training programs, and the unavailability of good housing and good jobs. And regrettably, the list goes on and on and on. Law enforcement in our circuit court, though, have been making some progress in improving community relations by implementing various initiatives, including a new and advanced training for law enforcement, increased public education through outreach programs, implementation of restorative justice neighborhood courts, and rehabilitative initiatives such as the circuit court's RAP program in criminal court. And these initiatives are helping to improve public access to, as well as confidence in our justice system. However, we must remember that as we go forward in all our efforts, maintaining the human dignity of every person who enters the criminal justice system has to be of paramount importance. For only in this way will we be able to provide meaningful, just, and long-lasting solutions. There is a Latin term on the back wall of the Illinois Supreme Court, audi alterum partem, hear the other side. And it is a mandate to the justices every time they step onto the bench. However, all of us can learn much by listening to each other, and that is why I'm so optimistic about today's program. The vision and the knowledge of our panelists and our featured luncheon speaker, Professor Ronal Serpas, will be enlightening, thought-provoking, and undoubtedly will generate, hopefully, new energy and new ideas for developing the more effective ways to curb violence in our beloved city. So I'm very pleased that Chicago Bar Association will also hold, actually hold more and follow up with 2 more, Terry, is that what you said, Dan? 2 more summits on this critical issue. And a second will be, I guess, in September. So I encourage everyone to continue the dialogue that has begun today with the CBA and with each other. Exchange cards. Introduce yourself to someone you haven't met before. So together, we can and will make a difference. And thank you very much for participating in today's summit and for your commitment to making Chicago a better place for all of us to live. Thank you.